Hi, and welcome back to Continual Fandom. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're stepping into a future apocalyptic already set in 2019 of the past with an apocalypse that was other than what we got. Tonight we're going to be talking all about the TV series Dark Angel and the follow-up books and maybe even a bit of the games. So let's see who all is coming in to talk about a fun series that got killed way too soon. Cericia?
Hi, everybody. My name is Theresia Glass. I write paranormal romance, contemporary romance, and urban fantasy.
Ian?
Hi, I am Ian Lacey. I write young adult, sci-fi horror. I dabble in dystopian and adult horror as well. And I'm excited about this panel.
Because we're going to be dabbling in dystopia. Bobby?
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I write a little bit of everything. I do a lot of crime fiction, sci-fi, horror, media tie-in stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. I love playing in dystopian futures too, so that should be fun.
Janet?
I'm Janet Walden West, and I write urban fantasy and a little bit of paranormal and contemporary romance.
So stepping back into about, what was it, 2000? I was trying to remember what it premiered. I hate old age senility and not having done my research. Anyway,
2000. It premiered in 2000.
What do you know? All right, so it premiered in 2000. The things that I remember watching, because I saw, when I saw the first pilot episode, we're looking at, that dystopian, post-apocalyptic, EMP's been set off, somebody's trashed Seattle, and we know that kind of this major thing has gone on. And Bobby was kind enough, and we can dive down this path to talk about the fact there appeared to be some other disease going on as well at the time. So I'll let you drive on that. But the thing that caught me first was not just Jessica Alba, but it was also the nature of kind of that underground media, right? It was that you get to see the eyes, you get to see the voice. And it was really a bit of that sense of take a little bit of the 1984, take a bit of all of those elements that come in and say, yeah, this is not the apocalypse we were promised by Mad Max. So, Miss Glass, would you like to talk a little bit about kind of your first take on when you first saw the show?
Oh, 2000 was so long ago, wasn't it? I just remember, and of course, I was like 2 years old then. I just remember it being, I was just awed that there was like this kick-ass female hero, because, I hadn't had one like since Wonder Woman for me. So it was nice to kind of see this series that kind of, wrapped up all my geekdom stuff, just kind of in one nice series. You had this kick-ass female character, you had her group of friends, you had her fighting the big bad, you had this tech but not tech kind of world, like you said, it's a post-apocalyptic world, and that was like my first exposure to that kind of stuff back in 2000. So I just really glommed onto it then, back then, for those reasons.
Ian, what about you?
Well, I've always liked the dystopian genre, like from Mad Max back in the day with like Tina Turner Beyond Thunderdome, and I love the sci-fi techie stuff. And I've always been attracted to that. And, add on some great characters, like you have super soldiers and you have the rebels against, the big bad. I was hooked from like the first episode. And then Jessica Alba was a really cool, hero. It wasn't just like these big buff dudes, but you have this tiny little girl who can like kick butt. So that had me. And then you have all the different like mutants, just the whole city environment, just how you have tech in an era where, everything is crumbling. And I love the whole concept of the whole thing just caught me. And just the title was great too.
Bobby?
And she was smart, not just kick ass. She was smart. There's a lot of good deductive and stuff that she does, especially in the pilot, which I rewatched this week. But for me, the two things that, well, one, the type of show it is, appealed to me. But obviously, James Cameron being the creator was a big deal because, I had obviously James Cameron's filmography is pretty impressive. And I knew Jessica Alba because she had been in Flipper, so I was like, "Oh, it's the girl from Flipper." But I don't think I had seen much more of her outside of that. But I remember seeing the commercials for it, and really thought this could be good. Like I said, the James Cameron was really the draw, and I really enjoyed it. I remember very much enjoying it. When I watched it the first time, I didn't think about some of the implications that I think of now. Like, oh, stuff like this will never happen. We'll never have these big medical conspiracies. We'll never have an EMP. We'll never have cyber journalism. We'll never have drones flying overhead all the time watching everything. Boy, what did I know? But I enjoyed the show. I thought it was really good. Unlike, I didn't care as much for her friends. I thought her friends were a little that didn't really bring much to the show, with the exception of Original Cindy. I thought Original Cindy was awesome, especially once she realizes who Max is and starts helping her. But a lot of the stuff that they did with her friends was just like, doesn't add anything to the story. It's just like, oh, we need a silly subplot. We lost a package, and but yeah, good show. I thought it had great potential. I would have loved to have seen where they could have taken it.
Janet?
Like Bobby, I think the commercials previews for it caught my eye because, it's like all action and flashy. So I took a chance on the first episode and then it hooked me because to me, it felt like right about that period was like this new era of these, independent kick-ass female heroes. This was the same time as like Xena and Buffy and the first La Femme Nikita show. So this fit in there perfectly. She's smart. She can kick ass. She was sarcastic. She didn't take anything from anyone, during the entire show, whether it was her love interest or her friends. Although I like Bobby, I did like, the ensemble cast. I'm a sucker for a good Scooby Gang.
Yeah, the friends never really, I don't know, didn't connect with me. But this was also too. This was an era where we didn't realize that Fox was going to cancel everything we fell in love with either. This was still kind of early.
Yeah, we can hate on Fox in a little while. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Fox was the Netflix before it was Netflix. You get 2 seasons and then wait, that's that's
if you were lucky, you got 2 seasons.
You were lucky.
If you were lucky, you got 2 seasons.
Yes, I think James Cameron guaranteed 2 seasons. I think that's what it was. It was because of just his name alone. I think they are automatically given 2 seasons.
Yeah, and I think probably that was part of the negotiated deal as well.
Because this was his first. This was his first TV show series.
Yeah, it was first TV.
Actually, it's his only TV series. He's never done another one since.
So yeah, and I wonder if he ever will. Because well, then again, Avatar maybe should have. Never mind. Also things. So just let's actually start with the Jessica Alba character, right? You start with kind of that big kick-ass female, lead, right? And this was kind of her first real breakout role. So she, this is the first time she's stepping into that kind of a lead. And from the time she hit the screen, there was never a question, right? You didn't see kind of that shakiness or doubt or things out of a pilot episode. A lot of the time you saw, in the good old days, where it was the, she's got her Scooby Gang, and then by the second episode, they've all been recast except for her, maybe. And how some of that works. And one of the things that caught me was just the the story value, the production value to walk in. And again, I put that on the James Cameron factor of walking to that story. But looking at her character arc of what we got to see was you had somebody that was strong, like you say, the kick-ass factors to it, but that also was that caring, compassionate character, despite the fact having been raised and having to break out of the school and, you know, being raised basically to be a merc and an assassin and a spy. That probably does a little bit for that childhood development, and yet we see somebody that is well-rounded. So, EM, you know, how did you view her character, Mac's character?
I liked her her smarts, but I felt like there was also a bit of just sort of innocence about her and naivete. In a sense, I think when it came to just her relationship with the reporter and then, the underground journalist, and just, her need also for just the relationships that she had, even though the characters were sort of like, her Scooby Gang. I liked that she was like a perfect balance of all of that. Like, she was ready to fight as necessary, like when needed, but there was just, well, when I watched it, she was just super cool. But I loved that whole super soldier, just the innocence and just her. Even though she's a super soldier, she's genetically enhanced. I felt like she was sort of more human. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just felt like she was just more of an authentic human, even though she was genetically enhanced. She was, went through all these things. There was just more pure humanity in her. And it's just weird. I just felt like that was her and her friend, like the other genetically enhanced people. There was just more of a sense of humanity in like the quote unquote mutants or others than there was in humans. So I think that was something that sort of I got from her throughout the series.
Bobby?
Yeah, I agree. I think the empathy and the compassion of Max's character, because Max's life would have been a whole lot simpler had she just kept her head down and not gotten involved with things, because people are hunting for her, and her helping other people often put her in danger because people could find her. And so a selfish character could have just said, not my problem, stayed under the radar and just and been fine. But she has this innate ability to want to help people. And then once her and Logan meet and she starts helping Logan, then it's even more, because he's like, with all this underground journalism stuff, he is taking on more high profile problems than she was dealing with before. So yeah, the fact that she cares and she does all of these things, that's the real mark of a hero, is they throw themselves into harm's way a lot of times. And Max does that with great frequency. She does it for total strangers. She does it for friends. She sees people in need and does whatever she needs to help them. And I that's the true mark of a hero, I think.
Janet?
I agree with EM and Bobby. I mean, the biggest thing about Max was, she had this life. She had totally embraced, the modern world, pop culture, having friends. She never held herself really off to the sidelines. She wasn't one of those solitary, tortured heroes, and she had every right to be. She didn't have to step out. She could stay back. She had seen literally the worst of people, as a child. And yet she still had this moral code. Even when she knew that it was not in her best interest, she would still step up or step out into the spotlight if it meant helping someone else. If she saw someone, in need, she might have had that thought of like, oh my God, these people are idiots, but I'm still going to save them.
couldn't
Reese.
join the bandwagon and the chorus of yes, the way that she grew up versus the way that she versus how she became. It would have been really easy for her to just been this cold person, but she made a conscious choice to kind of, you know, be part of the world, or in even a subconscious choice. It's just in the way that she interacted with people. She could have easily have been a solitary person, keeping to herself, just been the cold machine that they wanted her to be. But she found herself, as she made herself a part of the society at large, she became even more human than the humans were in that. And I think that that was probably a kind of a deliberate James Cameron-esque view to take with her, to show that the humans can be the worst that you can encounter, versus the people that you're supposed to be afraid of, the ones that go bump in the night, as it were. So I just really liked that her character was uh, fully fleshed out and well rounded, and she had, you know, her group of people, Scooby Gang or not, that she had her people that kept her on an even keel, and I just really liked that she had that.
And one of the interesting things, and again, I probably didn't see, or well, I know I didn't see things quite the same way then as I do now, looking at the balance. But they're putting the Max character, right, the big kick-ass female character, up against a journalist who's a paraplegic. Now we don't know that, of course, in the first episode. It takes a little bit to get down to that meeting. But they do.
He gets shot in the first episode.
Yeah, that's right. He gets shot in the first episode. I was trying to remember because it's been a while.
Yeah, I watched the pilot the other night. When they meet, he asks her for help. She says no. He goes and does it himself, and then gets shot. And so now she decides, she feels bad, and then goes to help him afterwards. And so that's where he loses the ability to walk. It's in the pilot. Yeah,
I couldn't remember when that happened. When that happened. But just looking at the nature of having somebody where you're taking away their power, so you're going to the male figure, you're taking away the power, you're taking away the strength, and you're just leaving him literally with the wealth and whatever that's worth in this world, and the power of journalism. That power of cyber journalism. And even though that was not entirely unique in 2000, we were already getting kind of into those nascent days. It was very much something I don't think the majority of people had seen. So, when you look at the Logan character, what were your thoughts in terms of how they brought him in and how they played off that relationship? Bobby, sorry.
so yeah, it was good. I like the Logan character. It took me a little while to warm to him. Because he does kind of fall into that where he's trying to manipulate her, at least at first. There does feel like there's a little bit of that condescending, I'm the man, you're the woman, or I'm rich and you're not, that kind of thing. He gets out of that pretty quickly, especially as their relationship starts to come together. But he does kind of have an air about him in the early days that was a little off-putting. But he was also a crusader. I did appreciate that he was, he had his mission and he was committed to doing right, even when it doesn't work to his advantage. I seem to recall there's one episode where he reports on his family because his family is doing something illegal, which ends up with him losing his fortune. But where he could have easily turned a blind eye to that to keep the money, to keep doing what he's doing, and had to come up with another way because stopping this problem was the right thing to do. And so I think I didn't appreciate the actor as much. Certainly seeing him on NCIS later, he has a bit more of range than he does here. But yeah, so on the rewatch, I found him much more interesting the second time around.
Janet?
I think that he was a perfect foil for Max. And his character was almost as strong as hers because he starts out, yes, he's a crusader, but I mean, he is literally in his ivory tower, his penthouse, looking down on the rest of this world. And in the first few episodes, he tries to shame Max into helping him. And she's just kind of like, I'm not having this. This is what the real world looks like. We're trying to survive. You have this privilege. You have this ability to sit up here and pass judgment, or, the risks you take aren't really risks, day to day living like the rest of us have to deal with. And the fact that, she had a huge part in bringing him to the point where he really did give up his fortune. He turned in his uncle, who was horrible, and he probably got some joy out of that. But, he turned him in and lost the family fortune, and he had to kind of start living like Max and her friends and the rest of the world.
Ceresia?
I am trying to pull from my memory from 23 years ago, and there's a big gaping hole there. So I'm going to defer to EM on the rest of it.
All right, EM.
All right. Right. As everybody was talking, I was just thinking about, I just sort of jot down notes as things hit the old brain here. And I just thought about how with Logan, usually it just always seems like the rich person has like a cause and they have a grand ideal, and it's an ideal. But when you touch it and you're exposed to it, it becomes real. And I think for Logan, Max led him into, the reality of what he was standing up for. He actually got to see it firsthand because, like, Bobby mentioned, like, you have the ivory tower, but the ivory tower is above the actual problem. And once he, got off of his high horse and was able to mingle, with those who were going through what he's supposedly championing, it's sort of, that's where his personality or his character starts to change a little bit. So that's sort of what stuck out. And it's just like when he treated Max like she was, just ignorant. It's just that whole where you're so caught up in your cause, or at least for Logan, it's like I know the severity of this, but when he got to experience it, it's like, oh, no, I don't actually. And getting to see the people, being impacted is what sort of started switching things around.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Logan cared about the cause. Max cared about the people.
Right.
Well, and I think that was part of the big setup, right? It was the dichotomy between the two and I think that helped to frame up, especially from what I remember, really the first 3/4 of season one, because it was really the play between them as we're learning more about other people out of the project and out of the government agency and Manticore and all of those moving pieces. We see pieces of that. And one of the things that the relationship between the two reminded me a little bit of was the old Incredible Hulk TV show, always being chased.
Yeah.
That somebody's always on your heels, kind of always that movement. And, looking at the Scooby Gang, right? Looking at everybody that's around her, where I think there's an aspect here of she's surrounded by a bunch of people that were mostly oblivious. Most of whom kind of got phased out as it went along, or were needed just for, hey, we need them for a B plot. But looking at how they set up just the world, right? That landscape of an America, of a Seattle that was fundamentally reduced down to third world country status, trying to figure out its way to recover from an EMP, We don't really get all the details of how that played out. There is an ongoing pandemic that's happening. And you're sort of looking at how the world has changed. So, just sort of thinking all that, right? About because I think you can't separate the Scooby Gang from the world that they were dropped into. So, Bobby, any thoughts? Kind of how they set up the world, right? That flavor of a post-apocalyptic world.
I think it looks good. I mean, we're just kind of seeing a segment of it. Because obviously the part where they filmed the downtown Seattle, everything almost kind of looks like people are living in tents. It's almost like a bizarre market you might see in like a James Bond movie or something. And so there's all of this, and everything's got a gray look to it. I think filming it in Seattle helped because it was always kind of rainy. But everything has a gray look to it. And so, but interspersed through that gray, you have people with bits of color to them. Like Max and her friends, the bike messengers all kind of had, bright colored as that they're kind of navigating this gray world. And they set up a lot of those type of things where it's a lot of visual cues that there are problems. They're squatting in a building with no doors, or and then you go to Logan's place, which is still fair. It's electricity. Everything looks nice and polished, and and then you're down here at the bottom where we don't have windows. So there's a lot of that, and then I know we sit on the Space Needle a lot. There's a lot of scenes that take place with them sitting on the Space Needle, looking out over Seattle. So I thought they set it up pretty good. And then in the second season, we really start to go beyond Seattle. But it ends up being a lot of more. We don't really get to a lot of more big cities. It's more out in the country or away from the downtown population centers.
Things that help production costs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's also, they're filming in Vancouver. They have a lot of that,
Janet?
But then,
yeah. Sorry, Bobby, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
This was one of my first exposures to like a dystopian, universe and story. And it just felt like, it was very believable. Okay. So it wasn't my first. There's Mad Max. This world, like we said before, is nothing like that. It is extremely believable. And at the same time, this horrible thing has happened. Economies have crashed. It's difficult to find medical care, all of that good stuff. But people, are still living their lives. After work, we're going to go out to the bar, shoot some pool. Everyone's worrying about their jerk of a boss and, getting to the next payday. So the whole thing was very believable, and the way they set it up really added a lot of realism to the situation. And even the fact that there was just, like the one sector that kind of carried on like the Pulse had never happened. Logan has his high rise. They go to the family's party, out on the estate. And, at some point when we see the big bad from the second season and his lovely, gated suburban community, whereas, the other 5 or 6 sectors are, it's been kind of trashed and everyone is just trying to get by, feed their kids, find a job.
A lot of fenced in areas too.
And I remember a lot of the vehicles reminding me a little bit of a Tesla. Teresa?
You wonder how it would have been, what it would have been like if it had have been anywhere other than Seattle. Like if it had have been set somewhere in Texas, or not knocking on Texans or anything, but if it had have been in a less progressive city than Seattle was, because I think that setting informed how those characters reacted in that world. They had the concerns, but you wonder, like, why wasn't there like a big military presence or something, or would there have been something like that if something like that had actually been a reality. Um, would the characters have acted the same way? I would like to think that, for the most part, that they would still be like that. Um, but yeah, that was just one of the things that I was thinking about as it realizing that it's in Seattle and what it would have been like if it had been someplace else. Would it still have been the same type of show, actually?
Em, how about you?
Let's see. Environment. Yeah, I agree with Cereses, right? Because sorry if I mispronounce your name, but it's like it would have been a different show if it was in a different location. And as everybody was talking, I always take notes. I was thinking about just the setting. It's like I think about the Jetsons versus Dark Angel, and you have all the color and like the promise of what the future would bring. But then with Dark Angel, with all the grayness and just, little spots of color, it's sort of the reality and the cost of progress. That was the thing that sort of stood out, is that you think in the beginning, progress is supposed to be like a universal thing meant for everybody, but it's very obvious just in how, just the environment is that progress is meant for the elite and not so much everybody else. And it was very, very clear just in how everything was. And as with the mention of tents in cities and stuff like that, I'm in Chicago. Right now we have the Venezuelan immigrants who are here, and you have this city, and then you have tents with all these people. And it's sort of just, it's that part of reality that people don't want to see, but it's there. And I think that's even with the gray, it's just sort of like symbolic of just like, oh no, we don't want to see that. We want to see where Logan lives. But it was very like in your face. This is reality. This is the price of progress. And technically progress isn't for everybody. So that's sort of what stood out for me.
Do you think that we as the viewers too get something different from it watching it now? Like I was 29 when it came on. I looked at the world much differently at 29 than I do at 52.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, because when I was watching it, like I didn't think anything about, the world and, the symbolism. I was like, ooh, you have super soldiers and you have mutants and you have like, fighting, plot, well, whatever. But I was just all about the action. But looking at it, just from, I'm in my 50s and I'm like, it's a very different perspective now.
Well, and I think one of the other things to remember is this is just after Y2K. I mean,
and it was and before 9/11.
And before 9/11. So you're talking about it was set in this very specific period.
Because that was a period of time where the thought of anything remotely like this happening here was just outlandish. It would be another year before we would realize how wrong we were thinking that, bad stuff wouldn't touch us here. So, yeah, it's a very different world.
You didn't do enough work in tech in the 90s, Bobby.
No, no.
We spent a lot of time sitting there betting on whether or not we could end the world. Or how we were going to. Anyway, I still don't have a supervillain lair, and I'm still bitter about that. Maybe not.
I see all those TV monitors behind you.
Looking at, because I think one of the biggest things that we got a fair amount of exposure to was Manticore as an organization. Seeing what they did, the idea of experimenting on kids and creating super soldiers. And that was a notion that I was used to from the comics, right? Captain America and things like this. And, we'd seen the notion of super soldiers and, this kind of training and things, but really not a lot of it. And then all of a sudden we're exposed to rigorous training. We're exposed to genetic manipulation. We're exposed to a lot of things that now we're like, oh yeah, that's probably happening, just in my neighbor's house, right? They got a CRISPR lab. But I mean, it was still very much a something I think that we could look at and go, that's science fiction, plausible, but science fiction. You know, so Janet, kind of looking back at kind of the rest of the super soldiers, everybody that's escaping, the nature of the government organization and Manticore and all of that, the entire antagonism behind it. And I would also say a very new level of government distrust, again, pre 9/11, right? Which I think is probably one of the reasons that the show didn't survive the fire they had against. But what are your thoughts in terms of kind of how they set up really the antagonist and that side of the
things? The biggest thing that stood out to me, because it's like, okay, the government doing bad things, private armies, this is all believable. But how they delved into how they started this with children, and we got so many shots of Max and, what she considered her siblings as children and the things that they went through to become what was basically, a government sanctioned soldier. That felt very different and very new. But at the same time, it wasn't that much of a stretch to think that, okay, maybe our government could do that, or maybe, someone else's government that we're vilifying right now could do that. But I think you're also right. If the show had come out, 2 years later, it would have been very different. It would have probably met with more success.
Ceresia?
I think you're right. Because the time period that it was set in, it versus, I mean, even now, people would totally be buying that the government has this secret underground layer where they're creating these soldiers. They're taking all of these people who have run away or have disappeared and are missing. They're in this secret underground military bunker being turned into super soldiers, and that's why we can't find them or something like that. You can totally believe, because there's plenty of people who believe that, getting vaccinated is actually, the government is putting things in you so that they can flip a switch or send out a beam, and suddenly everybody will turn into whatever the scare of the day is, I guess. So yeah, I think it was, like you said, it was science fiction, but it was science fiction that now people be like, of course that's going on, even though there's no proof of that going on. They would totally buy that. So would that mean that the show would be a success, or would it be like, oh yeah, we already know that stuff is going on, so this is not believable compared to where we are now? It makes you wonder.
I don't need to watch the news. EM?
Well, I immediately started thinking of aliens, and like when it comes to the distrust of government, like cinema sort of already prepped me for that, because the villain in Aliens, like, he set the soldiers up to be taken by aliens so he could get samples. And also it's like I have a friend who is in the Army Reserves, and I remember how she was warned, because I think she got sunburned during one of her weekend service things, and she was warned that if she got another sunburn, because she's really pale, if she got another sunburn, she would be fined for damaging government property. And that already put like a little seed about just the fact that when you're in the military, the government owns you anyway, so they can do what they want. So it's not that far-fetched to think that, they're probably doing art, they're altering people. I'm like, hello, my favorite cartoon and my favorite show growing up was The Bionic Man, The Bionic Woman. They were totally experimented on. My favorite experimental shows, especially when they got Max the Bionic Dog, but they've always done it. So it's not that far-fetched. And it wasn't hard for me to think that way. And then I think for kids, like when you're younger, everything's believable.
Bobby?
And I already had about 6 years of the X-Files telling me that the government was hiding stuff.
Yes, the
yeah.
X-Files.
Yeah. So Fox had already indoctrinated me into thinking that we can't trust the government. But yeah, I like that. I think that they did a really good job with Manticore. I think the smartest thing they did is that it's not a faceless villain. I think John Savage, certainly in season 1, and the Now Visitor in season 2, put a real face on the organization. Both evil faces at first, but both kind of soften a bit as they get involved with the kids now that they're adults. Max certainly has a profound effect on both of them going forward. Certainly more on John Savage's character, which I'm blanking on the character's name, but Lydecker, thank you. Certainly because where he becomes more of an active ally in season 2. And I think having those actors, and those were both good actors too, in those roles, made Manticore something different than just a faceless enemy. We got to know them. We got to see things. And then meeting the other kids, meeting the other super soldiers. And then in season 2, meeting the cast-offs, the quote unquote failed experiments. Like, I'm blanking on his name too. The guy with the dog, kind of part dog, part Kevin Durant played
season 2, right?
Yeah, Kevin Durant played him. He was fantastic. Joshua, fantastic character. But they were smart by giving that. This is a character that looks like he's scary, but he's the most kindest, gentlest soul that you meet in the show. Like you were saying earlier, it puts that human face on, that humans can be bad, but it gives us that other look at we're seeing humanity through his interpretation and dealing with them. So I think they did a good job of making us understand Manticore a little bit. They were still the bad guy. I would never not think of them as the bad guy, but they weren't a faceless enemy. And so we kind of could care a little bit, especially like once we got to know Lydecker a little bit as more than just the guy going, find them, kill them. I think that helped a lot.
Yeah.
Well, and I think,
and
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say for Joshua, it had that Beauty and the Beast vibe. Does anybody remember that show, Beauty and the Beast?
Yep.
I watched that a lot.
Sort of played off of that. Yeah, played off of that because you had this whole civilization that was underground. And so it just made me think of that. But
and he has the relationship. He has the relationship with the blind lady.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the scene with me that stands out is the Halloween episode where he's like, I can go outside. And people are coming up to me and they're not running away because they don't know it's not makeup. It's not a costume. And that was just, and the actor plays it so well. And this is a guy that usually plays villains. Kevin Durant plays bad guys all the time. So seeing him do something different like this, I thought he was perfect as Joshua.
Well, and I think all of this kind of lends itself into the show, right? And when we look at kind of all of the way it was wrapped together, it was very much a product of its time. But like a lot of good science fiction, it also seems to have been very predictive of things that were coming, even though we have not yet, at least, gone through an EMP. Not looking forward to one anytime soon, but you never know. But looking at all of the sorts of things that, again, I would look at predictively. So, the way that even though we didn't see social media presented that way, but the idea of citizen media, for lack of a better term,
Citizen
power of
journalism. Yeah.
citizen journalism,
Yeah.
power of a nascent internet to reach a global audience, and the ability in a way that could not be necessarily monitored and controlled at that point. Just sort of the nature of how we look at government projects, all of these sort of moving pieces. And I think also we can look at the way that I would argue that this has influenced a lot of what we've seen come forward in the last 25 years. You talk about, X-Files, again, a Fox production, another one of those things that was considered risky and all the rest of that. But we got to see a lot of shows produced that kind of went and pushed new edges, full-blown story arcs, developing characters, and where we got to see bigger and bigger and more developing worlds. And to me, a couple of the things that come out of the legacy of Dark Angel are, looking at things like how do we view kids? How do we view the government? How do we view technology? So, Cericia, what to you are some of the bigger legacies out of Dark Angel?
Well, for me, it personally it spawned a huge interest in books featuring badass female leads. So, which helped me sell my books, my urban fantasy series. So that I think was a really big thing that came from the interest that Dark Angel had. I think that it did kind of plant seeds of, like you were saying, about what could the government be doing, what could corporations be doing that we just have no idea about, what money buys versus what regular people have and struggle through. I think that it did good showing that those sorts of things, and it kind of made it. It kind of, in a way, served as I think, like a story Bible to a lot of people who were writing kick-ass, badass heroines who had this well-roundedness about them.
Ian?
On mute. I think for what I think Dark Angel did, or at least it crystallized from my perspective, it's just the threat of independence and the need for independence. Like the threat of independence, like to the powers that be, and the need for independence in people, like to sort of have your own, like to have your own perspective, to not, just sort of depend on info from other places. The need, I think, with the whole like underground, like the underground media, it's pretty much where most people get their media now. So I think it's sort of set up like a preface to where we are now. And I see that a lot in a lot of dystopian fiction, is that you have, the underground, then you have the big bad. And it is sort of like that canon for dystopia. They just sort of set it up. It's very Terminator, us against the big bad. But yeah, I think that's, yeah. And then also like monsters aren't necessarily like the creature. It can be actually the more civilized people tend to be the beast. And then you have those that are considered uncivilized and uneducated being the more humane. So I think that that's something that I sort of take away from just what Dark Angel sort of set the stage for. Just that what's really a monster.
Bobby?
I think when you're talking about predictive stuff, certainly post 9/11, we started seeing more private military contractors, which is kind of what Manticore was. They were an offshoot.
True.
That wasn't really as big a thing before. 9/11. I also think the drones, we talked earlier about that, the drones that are floating over Seattle in Dark Angel that are acting as police, that are spying on criminals and catching them in the act. That is more of a thing that, we see today, where there are cameras everywhere. And certainly the citizen journalism we've talked about it. Those are things that were not as big a deal back then. In those early days of, internet, the internet wasn't what the internet is now, so there's a lot there that, I think they predicted. There's a lot that happens with, they do a lot of CGI in this show, which at that time too was not really as big a thing. I think again that kind of comes from having James Cameron with the things he had in place. He could kind of pull things, and but there's a lot of those kind of things that you kind of look to and see, oh yeah, those things happened in real life later.
Janet?
My takeaway from Dark Angel was pushing the narrative on a very different kind of heroine. This is someone who's, one of the people. She's been horribly tortured, but at the same time, she is not some, aloof or bitter, angsty character. There are problems in her life. There are things that she wants to change. There are people that she's lost. But at the same time, she is very much part of society. She is very much going to go out with her friends, and have a good time. She's going to have to heat up, pot after pot of hot water just so she can shave her legs and go on a date. That was something that was so very different, having a heroine that was just unapologetic. It didn't matter if it was about, her desire for a really nice dress, her sexuality, the fact that, she looked at the guys and just went kind of, I can't with you right now. And it also showed us a different kind of
I think Janet froze up. We'll give her a second.
Oh no.
hero, because after
You froze up there for a second.
The EMP went off on her.
We
It
lost you
did.
there for
Big Brother didn't like what I was saying.
wouldn't be the first time. But yeah, we lost about the last 30 seconds there.
My point was just, this was a very different kind of heroine and a different kind of hero. After that first episode, Logan is not an action character. He has disabilities to overcome. He is an intellectual character. And I would argue that even Joshua was a hero in a very, very different kind. He looked scary as heck, but his strength was his kindness and his compassion.
So, and there's a lot of things in a lot of ways we could take this, but I'm going to kind of throw this out there for a last question. For everybody, we always have that thought in mind of something we wanted to hit on, touch on, something we wanted to dive into. For me, one of the things, again, looking at the show, and I think one of the things that was important to me also was looking at the fact of it's James Cameron, looking at the fact of the worlds he was already building. And I think we can see a lot of the films and the stories he's come up with. We can see seeds of some of those themes coming straight out of Dark Angel. But even beyond that, I think that there's a lot of themes and a lot of things that we see working its way through culture, pop culture, even now, storytelling. And to me, it helped push things. It helped to shift the narrative and create the next generation of strong characters and define strength and also intellectualism, because you did not find a lot of stupid people in this show. You had a few, but most of them were there for the humor value. So, Ian, is there anything that we haven't touched on you think that you'd want to mention or throw on the table?
I think We had a lot of things, but I know one of the things that sort of stood out also as everybody was talking, I was thinking about just that need to control the narrative of what's happening. Just it always seems to be like a fight to control the story. Um, and just that sort of that stood out for me because you have the underground journalism, again, journalism, and then you have the corporate journalism where, you know, advertisers drive the message. With the underground, you have, again, with Logan and Angel, the real people drive the story and they tell their story, which again adds humanity to what's going on and it makes it more real. So that was something that really stood out when it comes, just to the whole James Cameron, Dark Angel, even with the Terminator, just how he does the world building, how you have the big corporate, the big power, they're driving a narrative, they're going to do what they're going to do, but then you have the people who are like on the ground, they see what's happening and they're trying to sort of regain control of the narrative. So that was just something that I think was pretty, I don't know, I feel like it's sort of consistent with a lot of his messages in a lot of his movies.
It's kind of prophetic in a way because these days we have these big corporations and we have this corporate news networks, and we just have these people on the ground and the underground journalism and all of that that's still going on, and how he who controls the narrative wins, it seems like, but there is a good enough subset of people like Max and her friends and her allies who are and see, I lost my train of thought that fast, who are fighting against the big conglomerations and the corporate news. And I think that's why a lot of people are turning to, like you said, those underground sources or those minority sources, if you will, to try to get their way, find their way, and live their life outside of what big corporation, big media wants us to live.
Bobby?
We've talked a lot about James Cameron. I also we need to mention Chick Eagley, who co-created the show with James Cameron. Eagley is a fantastic writer who has worked on some amazing things over the years. Some big TV shows like St. Elsewhere, Moonlighting, NYPD Blue, Dexter, The Shield. So a lot of those more apocalyptic elements, those darker elements, I think came probably from him. Because he writes a lot of that type of stuff. Great character work, et cetera, et cetera. Oddly enough, it's also funny too that he and James Cameron worked together the first time doing Piranha 2, and then later they did Dark Angel. But yeah, I don't want to overlook Eagley's part of Dark Angel. And I think a lot of the character beats and the world building probably came from him. Just based on what I've seen him do in other stuff. So I think those two together really created a wonderful world. And sad we never got to see it. We never got to go outside of Seattle too much to see it. I would have loved to have seen what the effect of the EMP had on other cities. Because they do make it sound like in the pilot that it's not just Seattle, like the EMP was over the entire US.
Yeah, it was North America.
That pretty much North America, not just us, Canada,
yeah,
Mexico, we were all hit. So it would have been cool, I think, in later seasons. I would have loved, I think we talked earlier about seeing like some of the countryside, but wouldn't it have been cool to see, wonder what happened to Chicago or New York, or, seeing how things would have played out differently. So yeah, that could have been fun.
Janet?
I feel like Dark Angel especially kind of shone a light on future shows that were going to be a little more complex. There were a lot of shades of gray. The good guys were not necessarily, squeaky clean. We'll rob a museum or whatever if we need rent money. And the bad guys did have a much more human face, and the bad guys were not always completely evil, just like Lydecker as it went along, where he started talking about them as my kids. And it went from, this is something I own, my kids, to these are my kids that I'm trying to protect. So that whole kind of subversive vibe ran through the show. And I think we saw a lot more of that after.
Well, I think that's a place to wrap this one up. But before we end this universe, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course, whatever that book is that people need to be putting on that brand new Kindle. So, Miss Glass, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Ceresia Glass. My website is ceresia.com. I'm sometimes on TikTok. Whenever I have makeup on, I will go and record something out there, which means that I'm out there very infrequently. And I'm still on the Former Bird app at Ceresia. And my latest release came out last Tuesday, and it's called Game On. It's a rom-com set in a gamer world.
Ian?
Well, anybody can find me on Facebook, author Ian Lacey. I'm always on there. Coffee memes, horror groups, that's where I am. I also am on TikTok, not being productive, so I try not to be on there too often because I'm usually, instead of posting, I'm scrolling. So, but I do have a TikTok, and that would be author Ian Lacey Books and Baubles, because I started a shop. And I have a website, ianlacey.com. All my socials are there, so you'll find the Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. So that's where you can find me. And my latest book, Song of Sin, is still out there. And if you love werewolves and you like horror, that's the book for you.
Bobby?
BobbyNash.com is my website. There's links to everything. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Pinterest. I don't have TikTok yet. I'm behind the curve on that one. But I'm all over those places. You can find me. Please stop and say hello. Just this past week, actually just a few days as we're recording this, I had a 6-book series come out from Abdo's Magic Wagon imprint. Abdo is a educational publisher. I wrote a 6-book graphic novel series called Crimes in Time, which is crime fiction stories set during real historical events. And so they gave me a list of historical events that I had to research and set crimes during, like the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the sinking of the Titanic, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the eruption of Mount St. Helens, Hurricane Katrina, and the New York City blackout of 1977. So those all came out the same day because their libraries are their primary audience. I mean, people can buy the books, but libraries will have them. School libraries as well as public libraries. You can see all the covers and everything at BobbyNash.com. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. That was a big one for me.
Janet?
I'm everywhere as Janet Walden West, although I am most often on Twitter. And Agent of Change, the newest book in my Region 2 series, just came out, and it follows a bunch of pop culture obsessed super soldiers.
Timely.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course here at Continual. And we'll see all you guys again soon. Go stack up those to be read piles. before the lights go out.